So do media reports on crimes against children focus on emotion rather than facts? Well, University of Cape Town PhD graduate Dr. Sisanda Nkola conducted a study on television news reporting of violent crimes against children, and she joins us to answer that question. Thank you very much for availing yourself this morning. Maybe let's start with your curiosity around this subject. What drew your attention?
Thank you very much. So my PhD was broader than looking just at crimes against children and how news media report on them, and looked at crime in general. But I think the reference there is for a paper that I published from my PhD. And it stems from the fact that most people's understanding of crime and the criminal justice system is not based on having interacted with the system, but from what we watch, whether it is series or television news in particular. And my curiosity stemmed from, if this is what is informing people, what mechanisms of communication are we using, and how does that then influence their perceptions on the criminal justice system.
You also note that in democracies around the world, the courts view news media as an essential component in how matters of law are communicated to the public. The news media fosters the idea of open justice by making it possible for the public to develop reliable perceptions through direct observation of judicial behavior and the processes and outcomes of the case. You focused on two news channels back in 2019, to be specific. What were the outcomes?
I think generally the outcome of the study as a whole is that in how news media reports on crime and justice, the focus is really on the emotive aspects of the system, rather than going into the factual elements through how visuals are used, for example. That tends not to really give a full picture of the criminal justice system. In my broader study, I look at the role of individuals and how the focus tends to be on individual cases and amplifying those, as opposed to shedding light on the criminal justice system as a system and the issues at play there. And I think my recommendation and call, particularly to audiovisual media, is to be mindful that in driving a more emotive narrative rather than factual, we are giving people an impression of a system. I mean, people who've reported in court will know a case is not nearly as dramatic as we often portray it, and that gives the public a particular impression. So in how we report, to really steer towards the more factual and educative elements of the platforms that we use to report, as opposed to being driven by the emotional elements that then give people a misunderstanding of the criminal justice system.
Fair enough. In a country like South Africa, how do you separate yourself from the emotion? And there's been a lot said about journalism and having to be objective. I ask, when you receive news, especially as journalists, you're often the ones who will get the news first, and then you have to absorb it before you bring it to the people. And it does impact you in a way. So you receive news of 8 women who have been raped, a 19-year-old raped 10 times. And so you've got different aspects, right, also of the newsroom. So you've got the reporter who will bring you the visuals, and then you will have a Dudu, for instance, who will bring you the story. But how do I separate myself, knowing that I have a niece, that anything could happen in this country?
Absolutely, Dudu. And I think the focus is not necessarily to separate. I mean, the kind of crimes we deal with on a daily basis as people in news media are horrendous. But what I'm saying is, in the reportage, so for example, with this latest case, this gang rape, which is absolutely horrific, what is actually going to happen is going to be a long process, delays, postponements, etc. And in being driven by a narrative that almost tries to mimic movies where things move very quickly, we leave people feeling like the criminal justice system is not as it should be. So if there's a postponement, for example, that is seen as an untoward delay, when we know that on how the criminal justice system works, things are slow, things need to be done in a particular way. So my call is not to try and sanitize, but rather to report and cover in a way that portrays the system for what it is, a slow system, a system that goes through various processes, and that is not nearly as dramatic as we have made it seem to be.
Sure. Has it gotten better over the years? This was a study that was done in 2019. We are sitting on 2022.
I wouldn't say so, Dudu. I think some of the elements would need conversations like this and conversations in newsrooms, because it's a matter of maybe tweaking elements here and there. And I in no way suggest that this is deliberate on the part of news media. I think it's how we are trained. So it would be made through things like training and conversations where slight changes could then be made. And I think those slight changes could really result in a widespread change in how the public perceives the criminal justice system.
Fair enough, and very informative and helpful. Thank you very much for availing yourself this morning. Dr. Sisanda Nkwala is a UCT PhD graduate. Thank you very much.